Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. One of the great things about TV shows like The Bad Batch is that these shows tend to jump around the galaxy quite a bit, and for Star Wars fans who love background information and lore, this is kind of ideal. I mean, for me, The Bad Batch allows me to see what life is actually like in the rest of the galaxy outside of, Tatooine and Coruscant. And although the third and final season of The Bad Batch is going to be more linear in structure and have less side detours, we're still catching glimpses of what life was like during this time period, 18 BBY. And it's an important time period because it's just a year or so after the fall of the Republic and the rise of the New Order. This would have been a turbulent era. The galaxy was recovering from war, and although Palpatine had established a new order, the Republic as an entity had lasted for tens of thousands of years, and there were still deeply rooted institutions and organizations that still held a great deal of power and could continue to pose a threat to the Emperor. You see, 18 BBY wasn't the end of Palpatine's mission to establish an empire in the galaxy. It was just the beginning. Now, it's long been thought that the early years of imperial rule were actually quite stable and brought about economic reform and recovery for most of the galaxy. The idea has always been that, at least for the first 10 and 15 years, things were getting better for the average imperial citizen, not worse. It was only when the rebellion started rearing its head that the empire would pass more restrictive security laws, increase military spending, and pass policies like the Public Order Resentencing Directive and the Imperial Emergency Act. Remember, Luthen Rael was all about making the Empire overreact, causing more and more people to believe that revolution was necessary. It was only after the Empire began limiting freedoms and pursuing collective punishment for planets with insurgencies that we began to see more conflict emerge, which eventually led to more security operations, which led to more conflict, which cost more credits and war materials, which further put pressure on the supply chain and vendors within the military-industrial complex, which often left laborers working longer hours for less compensation, which of course leads to more conflict. Before we continue, I don't know if you guys noticed some of the new decorations we have on our set. Well, that's thanks to our sponsor for today's video, Displate. They have a huge collection of licensed artwork, both original works and also images from all of your favorite movies and TV franchises, sports teams, musicians, video games, basically anything you can think of. And not only are the prints extremely high fidelity, they're printed on durable sheets of metal, which means they'll last a really long time. And you don't have to worry about ripping them or damaging them when you change their locations. And mounting it all is a breeze as well. I got this large, gorgeous Coruscant travel poster from them because, man, do I need a vacation. And I also got this really detailed poster with a huge amount of Star Wars characters. And my editor Congo got a big Devils logo and a cool shot from the Cyberpunk Edge Runner anime. If you guys are interested in buying yourself some Displate, check out the link in the description down below. Also, if you guys use our discount code Generation Tech, that's all caps, you can get 22% off of 1 or 2 Displates, and if you purchase 3 Displates, you get 33% off. But what we see in The Bad Batch here confirms something that some people have talked about for quite some time, that the Empire was always terrible from the very moment it was created. When Omega and Crosshair escaped the secret labs in Mount Tantus, they arrived to the planet of Lau, just another backwater planet that has some new tenants, an imperial garrison, commanded by the opportunistic Captain Mann. In the name of security, this imperial unit has taken up position on the planet and provided daily patrols, increased security at the ports, and other essential industrial facilities. The Empire was here to deter threats from bandits, pirates, other criminal scum, or at least that's what the local population was told. And for a while, that seemed like a good idea, especially if you didn't know what the Empire was actually like. I mean, how many backwater worlds can afford a fully militarized police force to keep them safe? Very few, but of course, there's a price that needs to be paid. Well, soon, the good captain started taking a percentage of revenue from all the business owners in the city, a so-called imperial sales tax, if you will. Of course, there's no documentation outlining such taxes or payment, and I'm pretty sure the imperial government already levied its own tariffs and taxes on the city. See, what the captain was doing was actually just collecting protection money in a tiny little chest while being flanked by 2 TK troopers. He might as well have been a capo for a crime lord. I mean, what he's doing here is not a lot different from what Boba Fett did as Daimyo of Mos Espa. But of course, that's expected in the peripherals of the galaxy and Hutt-controlled territory. But surely, the Empire, with its dedication to peace and stability, they would have institutions to guard its citizens from corruption like this. Surely, Emperor Palpatine didn't run the entire galaxy like a mob boss, right? Well, you remember that time Han Solo tried to escape his gang on Corellia? Well, how did he get on a shuttle without papers or a chain code? It was bribery and corruption. Remember Governor Price, who was in charge of the ill-fated imperial occupation of Lothal? You know how she got her position? By successfully navigating the seedy and corrupt world of backstabbing, power-hungry imperial governors and moffs. What about that crazy assassination attempt pulled off by Chamsandula against the Emperor on Ryloth? How do you think an ambitious Twilight revolutionary almost pulled off a stunt like this on a heavily occupied planet? Well, it's because the local moff was a spice addict and she was too busy just chilling out on the moon of Ryloth to do anything. It was actually her underling, Colonel Belcor Gray, who ran all day-to-day operations, and he was super corrupt. He actually fed Chamsandula all that information in an attempt to get rid of the Moff. Corruption rears its ugly head everywhere we look in the Empire. And, you know, this is just typical of totalitarian dictatorships, autocratic regimes. As we see in our own world, it's not even about individual greed or selfishness. That's not what really creates this corruption. You have that human nature everywhere. What the main problem here is you have very poorly created institutions and structures to eliminate corruption. The corruption that the Empire faced was more or less the result of the structural changes that Palpatine made to the Republic in order to seize power. And as you can see, that corruption is super dangerous. It allows Han Solo to escape the law to one day become one of the most dangerous rebel generals in the galaxy. It allows Orinda Price to become governor of Lothal, a position she was really unqualified for. She was a local who mixed in her family's personal business interests and baggage when it came to ruling the planet. It was also under her leadership that the Empire would lose complete control of Lothal. And of course, that spice-addled Moth and her duplicitous underling, well, they almost got the Emperor killed, and that would have caused a lot of problems. All of this was caused by corruption. You know, the Republic was corrupt as well, but we're talking about institutionalized corruption, where political powers favor those who they are familiar with or have vetted beforehand. I'm from Jersey, so I'm fully aware of how terrible institutionalized corruption can be. We have it here at the local, city level, and state level in almost every department when we're dealing with stuff. Do you want to renovate your house? Well, you got to use this architect that is officially vetted by the township, otherwise your building permits might not be approved. It's true that this architect might be more familiar with the building codes of the city, and so by allowing this architect to have a little bit more wiggle room when he's planning his projects, it does streamline the amount of paperwork that the local government has to do, but it is corruption. I mean, what if I want to use another architect because this architect only builds stupid roundhouses or something like that? Corruption with a lowercase c. That's what I like to call it. And it's not necessarily something you can eliminate. It's not great, but it's not the end of the world. It doesn't prevent me from living a full life, for instance. Oh, and by the way, this is what happens when you remove your local journalists and newspapers. There's no one watching over the government anymore. The Republic had a lot of institutional corruption and favoritism. Take a look at General Grievous, for instance. He used to be an organic, not a human, but just like a being of some kind. His people, the Kaleesh, were being exterminated and enslaved by an insect species known as the Hook. Now, Grievous managed to rally his people and carry out a massive counteroffensive that not only pushes the Hook off of his planet, but onto their own planet. The Hook began to panic, and they called the Republic for help. You see, the Kaleesh were not a known entity to the Republic. The Hook, on the other hand, had representation. And so the Republic would come in on the side of the Hook. They would impose massive sanctions on the Kaleesh people, creating starvation on their planet, and they would also pass other types of political condemnation without actually listening to what the Kaleesh side of the story was, simply because they didn't have representation. This is awful. This is bad. This is corruption. But here's the thing, most large organizations deal with corruption. And the idea is not to completely eliminate corruption because it's impossible. It's in human nature to take what we can. The idea instead is to make corruption manageable and occur less frequently. And perhaps equally as important, when corruption is caught, to make an example of the individuals who are creating the crime, because one of the biggest ways to stop corruption is fostering a positive culture. Overall, the Republic was far less corrupt than the Empire, and that's mainly because of two major things. The Republic had a bloated and very complicated bureaucratic system that was designed specifically to root out corruption. When you have to write down each one of your expenses and document every major decision you make, suddenly a paper trail appears that makes committing more heinous crimes all that more difficult. Of course, bureaucracy does increase the likeliness of institutionalized corruption. And in the long run, no defense is really perfect. Every rule and regulation you put in place will eventually have a loophole that can be exploited. And so perhaps equally as important to stopping corruption was a free and open media, and the public sentiment that the media could control. You simply couldn't have an imperial captain running an open protection racket on the planet Lao if you had a free and open media. The news would eventually get out that this was happening. This would eventually lead to public disapproval, which would eventually lead to action. Maybe the imperial captain's supervisor would say something. Maybe the judicial department would step in and actually carry out an investigation of some kind. I believe what is happening on Lao could easily be considered extortion. And as an imperial officer, well, the good Captain Mann would be tried in a military tribunal, which is not fun. See, the very things that Palpatine destroyed and trampled over to get into power also opened the door for millions of other like-minded individuals. This is pure chaos, the Empire. Individuals who believe that government jobs are not about serving one's nation, but about enriching one's pockets. When it became clear that the various institutions, watchdog groups, media organizations that were designed to make sure government officials didn't do crazy stuff disappeared, yet all sorts of lowlives, criminal scum, and opportunists put on imperial grays in order to pursue wealth and political power. In a lot of ways, the Imperial Academy system from which they came from was modeled after the Sith academies of old, where power competition was the most important part of an education, and cadets were basically allowed to do anything to get ahead as long as they didn't get caught. This created an environment of not only corruption, but also deceit, violence, and even murder. And the individuals who graduated were oftentimes the best at these very nefarious activities, and they would basically form the backbone of the entire empire. And this culture of corruption in the empire leads to systematic corruption, which got so bad that you could make the argument that the empire was simply just one large kleptocracy. That's a government where leaders use their political power simply to steal from the state and the people, and they basically laugh at the judicial system and all the other regulations guarding the state from these activities. Now, a lot of you guys might be wondering, well, why does this matter? After all, I did say that the Republic was also corrupt. And that's the exact kind of whataboutism that an imperial propaganda officer would use. He would basically be like, well, the Republic was corrupt, the Empire is corrupt as well. What's the difference? Why does it matter? It does matter, because there's always a scale to how bad one's behavior is. Kicking someone in the shin is not the same as blowing their shin off with a shotgun, right? There's soft corruption that can come in the form of annoying fines and fees that we discussed. And then there's kleptocracy, where the leaders of a country are so corrupt that massive portions of taxpayer money is stolen, leaving a nation underdeveloped, lacking infrastructure, and just basically worse off. In a kleptocracy, the corruption gets so bad that everyone knows the corruption's happening, but there are no media stories about it, there are no judicial cases against it, there's no prosecution whatsoever, no consequences. And that's really bad, because if you're an honest person continuously seeing horrible people get away with stealing money, it creates a sort of pessimism that can take over an entire society and make people exceptionally cynical about the government, the institutions, and each other. And this, of course, will just lead to more people not paying taxes and trying to pursue corrupt ways of making money. Perception is an incredibly important thing in any social group, and that's because the majority of people were followers. We look towards others to see how to act and what we should do and what we shouldn't do. For instance, on the highway in America, we know that the speed limit is 55 to 65 miles per hour, but most people tend to drive 10 to 20 miles over that limit because we know everyone else is doing it. Now, this is relatively harmless, but imagine if we replace going over the speed limit by 10 miles with extorting the local people of a city that you're occupying. If you know that other imperial officers are getting away with straight up robbery of the local citizenship, there's a good chance that this behavior will spread to other officers that are, garrisoned in various cities across the galaxy. Now, civilization generally spreads on nodes of transportation and trade, and the Empire is no different. Whenever they entered a planet or city, they usually would create a garrison around the local spaceports and immediately take over control of all goods and people coming in and out of the city. They'll say it's for security reasons. Of course, they want to vet all of the material to make sure there's no weapons, dangerous things, no terrorists on board. It's the same thing that the Trade Federation did with the Outer Rim. Without any oversight or regulations from the central government, the Trade Federation just needed to control the trade, and they could control basically everything in their territory. This led them to price gouging, pushing people into indentured servitude by debt trapping them, all sorts of crazy behavior. For the Empire, the main racket here was local imperial officers imposing additional tariffs on top of the already existing tariffs being collected by local spaceports, the sector government, and the central government. government. This got so bad that according to Eli Vanto, the aide of Grand Admiral Thrawn, that in imperial-controlled spaceports, usually around 50 to 60% of all goods arriving on the planet were smuggled and had no taxes paid on them. That is a crazy amount of black market goods. I mean, this is a clear sign that whatever the Empire is doing with these tariffs, it is not working, and it's making people do very desperate things. You know, I've seen this kind of stuff happen in real life myself firsthand. In 2020, a report found that 53.5% of cigarettes smoked in New York City were purchased on the black market. And if you're from the area, you're not going to be surprised because a pack of Marlboros costs close to like 20 bucks nowadays, at least Midtown. And this happens when you add in federal, state, and of course, that New York City local tax. Not only that, all the various migrant communities also seem to bring their own cigarettes from back home, so you have a very complex and international black market cigarette market thing going on. It's kind of unique. Of course, New York City is not concerned with the lost tax revenue from cigarettes. This mostly is a health issue. You know, cigarettes, like swimming with dolphins, can be life-threatening. Anyway, this one example of Lao, of our corrupt imperial Captain Mann, confirms what has always been widely suspected. When left to their own devices, when no one is looking over their shoulders, people in positions of power will try to use that power to gain loot. I mean, it's just human nature. If you're gonna leave out the cookies without any, repercussions for us taking the cookies, we're gonna take the fucking cookies. Now, we have to keep this in mind, especially in real life when we see issues like corruption. And ultimately, the individuals exploiting the system are far less important than the fundamental structural issues that allow for corruption to take place. You know, I think this practice of junior officers collecting their own tariffs is destroying the Empire's economy. It's really severely hurting the tax revenue here. I mean, 50 to 60% of goods being smuggled is just completely stupid. And we're not just talking about one item like cigarettes, we're talking about everything. From like water to Ewok cheeks. I mean, speaking of water, you see what happens on Mos Espa when corruption goes completely unchecked? You can have this dickwad over here charging an arm and a leg for water supplies, and all he really needs to do is to continue paying some bribes to the local elected official who controls all of the muscle. Of course, Boba Fett is not your typical leader and he does the right thing here. But then again, I mean, systems should be designed to protect the dumbest and the most vulnerable amongst us from the most malicious and violent people. You can't build a system that depends on, kind-hearted individuals like Boba Fett doing the right thing and putting the local water gouger on blast. In the long term, this massive shadow economy of black market goods shows us just how weak and backwards the Empire is. The Republic was built on trade and maintained its power because of its wealth. Heck, the Republic even went through a 1,000-year period of peace without any military force solely because the economic system based on rules and order was so universally dependent on that no one dared piss off the Republic. The truth is the imperial economy is a shrinking economy. The quality of life is going down for the average civilian. Yes, the imperial military is getting larger, but at what cost? You're replacing civilian bureaucrats with military governors. You're replacing local mayors with imperial junior officers who have no training in how to run the city. This is a complete mess. And this corruption also affected the services provided by the Empire. It hurt infrastructure programs, it made military procurement more costly. So it is my belief that the single biggest threat that the Empire faced in its first 5-10 years existence was corruption. I mean, corruption. Like the kind that Captain Mann is carrying out, it makes it harder for individuals to run businesses. I mean, who wants to have to pay all those taxes and then a protection fee to some random soldier? And on top of that, you have prices increasing everywhere because of these tariffs and black market smuggling. And so even basic goods become unaffordable. When people become desperate, that is when they start revolutions. That's when they join rebellions. People who are employed, well-fed, have a good life, they generally do not rebel. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed our assessment here of the early Empire. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.